Hello, this is Scott Baceno, editor of Telecoms.com here at Mobile World Congress 2025. Once more, happy to be at the Technotree stand and delighted to have another excellent panel where we're going to talk about some of the pressing topics of the day. I'll welcome from here, we've got Alex from Rethink, got Marina from MTN, Chris from IDC, and we've got Pekka from DNA, which is part of Telenor. So we've got two analysts, two operators and a journalist, so it should be fun. The broad theme that we're going to talk about on this panel today is sustainability, but in the context, obviously, of telecoms, and also in the context, obviously, of AI, because that seems to find its way into every conversation at the moment. And I thought I'd start by talking to the operators. Maybe you first, Marina. Sustainability in a telecoms context. Can you tell me a little bit about MTN's strategy and what the benefits for MTN and obviously the planet are for having that strategy?
Yes, so I think first thing is to understand who MTN is.
Yeah.
MTN is a Pan-African organization with a footprint across Africa in across 17 markets. And I think the nuance and setting that scene of the African context is that the needs are very different to the rest of the world. You find high levels of poverty, inequality, unemployment. So when you apply the lens of sustainability, it's really around what are the things that we're doing today for tomorrow, for the generations to come. And so our strategy is very focused around the pillars of doing for planet, doing for growth, doing for people, and doing it right at the end of the day. And through the strategy, we've been seeing that sustainability has helped to contribute to the business, not only from the traditional elements that sustainability is spoken about, which is, from an investor lens, your ability to engage your stakeholders, but also from your consumers. So we're seeing consumers more and more transitioning and shifting and choosing organizations, not only that are most environmentally conscious, because that's where everyone goes when we speak about environment, but you're also looking for, they're looking for organizations that stand up and do what's right, that support social causes like gender-based violence and other things. So you're actually seeing that we see, particularly in the African market, that it's not only the right thing to do, but it adds value to our consumers' lives. At the same time, there's significant business value as well.
So it's interesting you say that, because sometimes a lot of social sort of values do get grouped together with sort of abbreviations like CSR or something like that. But that's interesting. It's definitely your experience that consumers do view these things as a sort of whole, and they judge companies to a certain extent on their sort of social attitudes, and one of which is sustainability. So over to you, Pekka, on your side, have you got similar experiences? You're obviously in a very different part of the world.
Yeah, obviously, and well said. So not that much to add, but obviously we are also thinking that it needs to be the end-to-end chain from the customer to the product and to the service, so that the end-user devices needs to be sustainably made. Yeah, some of those are not in our as operator hands, but we need to acknowledge that and understand the whole chain. But what we are kind of taking care of is that, well, the products that we are serving, they are using electricity, which is made as green as possible, and as we are in Finland, it's a really cold place, so we can use the heating energy well to warm the houses during the winter time and that sort of a thing. So a lot of green stuff there, and like from the I'm from the technical side, so I'm maybe talking a bit different aspects here, but like the radio network, if you don't have a usage during the night, the AI capabilities can shut down those frequencies and shut down to a minimal consumption of energy that radio station when it's not used. So that's sort of a small things that will deliver the sustainability to the whole chain. So.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting that you talk about it like from a more sort of operational point of view.
Yeah.
Because, and maybe I'll sort of pivot to our analyst, and I'll start with you, Chris. I mean, a major overhead for telcos is energy consumption. So even leaving aside slightly more lofty altruistic ambitions, they've got a massive incentive to do that. And so do you see that that comes a lot, as that an increasingly big sort of narrative within operators, is this sustainability?
Absolutely. I mean, look, we all do want to be sustainable. We all want to be better. It looks good. It feels good. But at the end of the day, what is driving a lot of commercial decisions around that is also where is the money. So, Marina, it was really interesting. You actually started with investors as some of your key stakeholder groups. And look, when we as IDC survey telcos, but also the wider enterprise community, we do see actually access to green finance as a key reason why you would invest in sustainability, giving you cheaper financial rates. Electricity, another one. It's a great virtual signaling to say that you can do that, but you can reduce electricity, but it's also that financial capacity, particularly at a time over the last 2 to 3 years when energy costs have been really, really volatile. So being able to bring them down overall, or at least for usage over the long term, is also really needed for your business to be sustainable from a cost perspective as well.
Yeah. And Alex, one concern I often have as a journalist, when I receive, let's say, incoming press releases or communication on sustainable, my inner cynic sort of goes, all right, how substantial is this?
Yeah.
Or is it superficial? Is it greenwash?
Yeah.
Have you got any thoughts about how companies sort of navigate that?
Yeah, so I think being very clear on terms, on like what we mean, is very important. But similarly, like no one here has the right kind of language or numbers to do that now. And I sometimes wear like a video networking hat, and in there's an organization called the Greening of Streaming, and like that's a kind of sustainability organization, but what they're trying to do is focus on benchmarking like the sort of the energy requirements of delivering video. So I think this industry at Mobile Congress could benefit from a similar effort to like actually show how much energy is being used, because there's too many variables, and being able to, so as an industry, look at like something that we all kind of agree on as roughly right is, I think, a good first step. And to that end, yeah, whenever I see sustainability, I'm very concerned that it is marketing, it's greenwashing. I think what Marina was saying about the kind of consumer choice is interesting. I think in a world where there's not all that much that differentiates operators in like mature markets, maybe sustainability is a thing that shifts the needle. Like we do think consumers are a bit sort of more ethically conscious, but maybe that's just negated by sort of doom scrolling on our phones, you know. But yeah, I think in the benchmarking is an important part.
Yeah, and the ethically conscious. I mean, most people like to think that they're good people, and I'm always interested. I imagine for each individual, the threshold at which their preference to be ethical stops when it gets too expensive or too inconvenient or whatever. I mean, that's down to the individual.
Or when you don't have a purchasing choice.
Oh, there we are.
You're choosing between 3 exact, the same MNOs. And
then and also, how do you get? In fact, this is going to lead into another part of this. What I want to talk about: how do you make such informed decisions?
Yeah.
And I think one of the premises that of this panel we're having now is a concept of democratized AI, which I have to admit I had to look up just to find out exactly what it meant. But I think it really means that AI empowering the individual, and I guess that's where the democratized comes from. If everyone is more empowered, assisted by AI, then everyone, I guess, is more democratically empowered. But Marina, I'll go back to that customer choice thing, and maybe any thoughts you have on AI. I'd be fascinated to hear about it from your region's perspective as well. Is AI getting down to the sort of consumer level? Is it empowering people to make these kinds of choices, in your experience?
So I think just on democratizing, as an organization, we have this core belief, and I promise you can wake up any MTN in the middle of the night and ask, what is the core belief?
Right.
And the core belief is that everybody deserves the benefits of a modern connected life. So that principle of inclusion is really critical for us. When you look at the reality of AI, obviously, beyond it being the buzzword and sort of the wave that's going through the sector, when you look at the African continent, you're starting to see, it's almost like starting to bud. The use cases are starting to pop up more and more. Very interesting. I was yesterday with one of the technology companies. I won't mention the name, and they were showing where there are AI data centers, and the map was just showing how they're popping up all over the world. But on the continent, there wasn't a single AI-powered data center. So that's just shots to show that even though AI isn't in exclusionary nature, you know, it can be applied in every context, geographical setting and so forth. But the reality is that it will also, its starting point is society is not equal. So therefore there's a disparity, and you only hope that certain parts of the world will be able to access it to the same extent. But we need to recognize there's a maturity journey and there's an evolution journey. So I don't think it's inclusion for all off the bat. I think it's a case that everyone is trying to figure out how to introduce more use cases, and then that you need to look at different parts of the world and how it can start to mature over time.
Yeah, I mean, it occurs to me what a very persistent and long narrative to do with mobile and Africa has been how it's helped with inclusion with things like mobile finance and banking and that sort of thing. And maybe, I mean, I take your point about infrastructure, but maybe like what there's been a lot of announcements. I mean, every phone maker now says they got an AI phone, don't they? And maybe that will be another way in which places that are underserved by infrastructure, the mobile industry sort of transcends that and offers these kind of things to every part of the world, not just the richest bits. Fingers crossed. And in terms of, in terms of AI and green, a question for you, Pekka. There's billions of dollars being spent on data centers, as we were just describing, to run AI. Apparently, the best way we've got of running AI right now is to buy about 1 million NVIDIA GPUs and just throw computing grunt at it. But obviously, they're very hot and they require a lot of energy and they require a lot of cooling. Do you have any thoughts about that balance that we're striking with AI and sustainability?
Yeah, that is also really a great and a big question as such. But if taken, well, the location, well, the latest news from Google and DNA, we actually, was it last week, we announced a big cooperation with Google as they have a region in Finland, and they are also announcing to build another region to Finland because of the cooling is really sort of easy to manage because it's always sort of cold in every time of the year. Yeah. And as said, then the waste heat can be also used to warm the houses, which is really good and sustainable. So that's really a good way. From the teleoperator point of view, obviously the AI needs to have good connections and good the network infra so that it will work. So basically that will be sort of, or should it be maybe regulated to the country to be able to provide those connections to each customers or each people so that they can use and get hands of the AI usage so that they don't kind of fall out from the train, which is moving really, really fast already. And then about the usage, that is I think that time will tell that is it a good idea to use AI and spend also a lot of energy and compute to run that, and we'll see what are the end results when people are starting to use it and not thinking maybe anymore themselves, and then also the people in interaction will be going more towards the open AI cases. There's already some, at least on the Finnish news, that the young people are talking too much with the ChatGPT, and some weird things can happen. I don't know if that's sort of a sustainable for the whole human race as such. So I don't know if it's sustainable, but from the environment, from the point of location, the north places are good for that. At least we can use the energy well as it produces the compute for the AI.
So as I touched on earlier, both sustainability and AI are very prominent buzzwords, and they get thrown around a lot. One question I got for you, Chris, like at the show, one thing that's occurred to me, both in the panels I've done here previously and other conversations, I mean, AI is incredibly broad term. And obviously in the context of telecoms, one subdivision we can have is we can be talking about AI in the systems, like we used to talk about automation and all that sort of thing. And then we've got the stuff that's really buzzy, which is the Gen AI, and the last panel we had was an agentic AI, and whether or not companies are going to be run by AI, which I find rather an alarming prospect, but there you go. Just give me a sense of like the conversations you're having with people in the telco space about AI, sorting the wheat from the chaff. What are the more sort of substantial discussions you're having concerning AI?
I mean, look, AI is not new to the industry. We've been doing this for donkey's years. If we think out actually what are some of the most basic automations we've already done in our networks, at one point that was probably called AI.
Yeah.
Then we've kind of gone on to machine learning and lots of predictive analytics, which are already being implemented in our networks now. Now where we're getting, kind of from 2022 onwards, there's been this big focus on Gen AI. But still, what do I see a lot of operators focusing on? It's predictive stuff, getting that more deeply in, and then starting to layer on additional capabilities. So let's take the example of customer experience. We've had chatbots, kind of pretty standard stuff, going on, take response, they can do limited amounts. Now we're laying on an additional layer of language processing, or then we're kind of going, right, we need a large language model, or we need some kind of bigger language model to be able to do it in a more detailed or more responsive fashion, more human fashion. So we're laying that as additional capability and then enabling that chatbot capability, that interface with the customer, to actually go and do not just answer a set FAQ, but now they can take a customer saying, what's wrong with my bill, and start to take details from different systems and explain it. And then maybe the next step is going, now we've explained your bill and you're upset with this particular problem, we can see it from yours. Well, maybe you're not on the right service package.
Yeah.
So these are actually the service packages which we think would be best for you to take instead, to mean that you're getting the solution you want.
That's interesting. And sort of similar question to you then, Alex, in terms of like conversations that you're having professionally, in terms of where, you know, sorting the wheat from the chaff in the buzzword, where AI is really substantial and is really being used in significant ways. Any examples spring to mind?
I think, like on the sort of the customer support side, I remember years back, the robotic process automation had a bit of a moment, and there the concept is that a computer watches how a person uses a system and then begins learning from it and copies it. And the idea there was, like, our customer service agents, we can free them up from answering the same question 30 times a day, and they can go and do something proactive. And I always thought that was quite a naive idea, because if you're like a manager and you're looking at this as a cost base, no, I don't need the proactive stuff, I want the cost saving, and that leads to replacing a job. And that seems to be on the cards for a lot of the network operation side as well. I think a lot of the automation, you know, it's more like machine learning than it is Gen AI, but if you sort of boil it all the way back, you can kind of say, well, it is essentially a very big list of if this then that. And so there does seem to be like a disconnect in how people talk about it. And I think on the automation point, there's an overlap with this network API stuff, which I'm fairly cynical about.
Right.
I think
you're
for
a good company.
Yeah, good. So for a lot of these AI sort of services, if the idea is it's going to be programmable, controllable, I think there's a lot of legwork that needs to be done making the network ready. And so for all the marketing bluster about how like an agentic AI could, you know, run a network operations center, like find me the NOC, you know, decision maker who would put the network in the hands of like a black box system. I'm not convinced about that. But there is a big potential in terms of staffing requirements. But then that's not a great look for an operator to start.
It certainly
But
is.
Alex,
laying off.
I'd just break in on that around
Yeah.
staffing requirements, because something else we see on the kind of talent intake of telcos is they're really finding it hard to get that next generation of engineers in.
Yeah.
So when we're actually talking about some of these systems which have been in for 10, 20 years,
Yeah, they're
actually in
retiring
5 years' time,
Yeah,
there may
yeah,
not be
yeah.
anyone to do it.
Yeah.
So we do need some of these bits in place
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
That
Definitely.
was coming up in the previous conversation we had when we were talking about the agentic CEO, where maybe as people get more and more reliant and lean more heavily on AI, which is a very useful tool and a great source of improved productivity, do some of these skills that people used to have just atrophy? And is there one day going to be a time when those skills don't exist anymore? And then we're totally dependent on AI, which is where I start to get a bit dystopian and freaked out.
I think that's where the idea of the democratization through AI is that anybody with a subscription can access these services, but
Yeah.
I think the underlying skill, like understanding how these systems work, I think you'd lose that. So then you become utterly reliant on a very select number of vendors who are providing the AI system in which you can type or speak an instruction that's plumbed in to the operator network, and I think you've just made more bottlenecks for yourself.
Okay, well, I think we're nearly out of time. I think I want to finish off in the topic of the democratization. I thought some of what you were saying, Marina, especially interested me as it affects Africa, which is not a continent I'm very familiar with. But I've always found the whole narrative around how mobile can empower individuals, who have a much lower sort of GDP per capita than we have in Western Europe or whatever. I think that's a great story. So if we could just finish off in terms of AI and NTN, maybe have a little think about how things could progress, how it could help empower people that MTN serves a little bit more.
So I think when you look at AI, there's huge opportunities. I think we're seeing many different use cases, especially from a socioeconomic perspective, the use of AI in health, education, and so forth, which is really critical. And I think an area we haven't yet touched on is when it comes to sustainability itself. Right. And the type of initiatives. So MTN has set a target to achieve net zero by 2040, and obviously it's going to take a basket of solutions.
Yep.
Bringing in renewables, energy efficiency, and so forth. And we're finding that AI, even though some people argue that it is a lot more emissions heavier than other technologies, we're actually finding that it really helps us to reduce our emissions. So we've piloted across our markets AI tools that will automatically pick up, like let's say a tower's gone down, and they will then say, okay, what's the most energy efficient solution to switch to? So you're starting to see what humans would have typically done. The AI is able to now start to bring the efficiencies and really finding. So I think there's great use cases. I think it can bring a lot of good, both from a socioeconomic perspective, but also from a sustainability lens as well.
Okay, that makes lots of sense, and I guess with all technology, it comes down to trade-offs. You could just dwell on the negatives, and if I allow myself with AI, I go off in a dystopian direction. But obviously, I realise that's partly tongue-in-cheek, and there are a hell of a lot of really useful and beneficial things that it can do. And we just have to accept those trade-offs and make the most of it. Well, look, we're out of time. That was fascinating. Thanks to all of you. That's been my third panel talking about AI. I feel like I've learnt a lot about it, and maybe even made me a bit less cautious and a bit more optimistic about the good it can do. So, and I'll say thanks again to TechnoTree for hosting this, and we'll leave it at that.